Good morning, everybody. We start with some delay, but I think everybody will understand with so many participants. The registration process is a little bit longer. So I'm very, very happy to welcome you here. It's a great honor for me to welcome you to this historical 20th Humanitarian Congress in Berlin. In the name of the inviting organizations, Doctors Without Frontiers, Doctors of the World, the German Red Cross, and the Berlin Chamber of Physicians. Please don't hesitate to take your seats at the front or nearer to the stage so that you can discuss in the next discussions, that you can interact with the speakers the best way possible. 20 years Humanitarian Congress. This sounds like a jubilee and like an already long story. This is a story of success, with a steady growing number of participants reaching more than 800, I think even 900 last year. And this is the reason why this year the Congress has moved after so many years from the university campus of the Charité to this new venue, the Urania, one of the most famous cultural centers in Berlin. We have more space for the sessions, for the forum, for the side events, and evidently also for all informal gathering that you will certainly use during this Congress. You have seen the program. It's a very rich one with an impressive number of sessions and discussions, as well as remarkable choice of highly competent and eloquent speakers. And don't talk about me. This is also, and most of all, a story of commitment and tenacity, incarnated by people who had the vision and dared to put it into action, many of them on a voluntary basis or besides their main jobs, driven by the enthusiasm and conviction that makes things happen. And that is certainly also the fundament of humanitarian action. One of those people, Ulrike von Pilar, was motor for this Congress for many years until last year, and she tries now to enjoy what I would call an active retirement. Thank you, Ulrike, for having made this through and so great. You, Ulrike, will have the honor to make the closing statement of this Congress tomorrow, and you will certainly come back to the major milestones of those tremendous 20 years. So I'll keep this undisclosed for now, which should be one more motivation for you to stay until the end of the Congress. Before I introduce the first keynote discussion and the overall thematic of this year's Congress, let me make a few announcements for the sake of a smooth flow of the next 2 days. Catering will be available on the ground floor and at the first floor. Please note that the reception in the evening on Thursday will take place on the ground floor. Drinks can be purchased at the bar. The Humanitarian Forum exhibition with information booths from participants' organizations is taking place during the whole Congress on the ground, first, second, and third floor. Please use the opportunity to get to know better possible partners. We welcome also the online audience. The sessions in the first room will be streamed live in this room. Please, dear participants in the room and online, feel committed to comment the sessions on Facebook and Twitter using the hashtag HCBerlin. This will be an important leverage for the range of coverage of the Congress beyond this room. Any questions can be directed to our great volunteers and at the registration desk. And here already our appreciation for brilliant volunteer support without which this event would not be possible. Those are almost 100 volunteers working to make this happen. And last but not least, let's do it myself. Please turn your mobile phones out to silent during the discussions. We want to be concentrated and let others be too. So, no more excuses. Advocating for human dignity in times of crisis, this is the motto of this Congress. Along the 20 years of the Congress, the subjects treated have varied a lot, from medical to ethical ones. The Congress also never feared to exercise self-critique. Are we efficient enough? Do we harm? Do we let ourselves be instrumentalized? Has aid become a mere business? But this year, the theme is about human dignity and about advocating. As many actors feel that humanitarianism today is put into question in its core mission. Help the most vulnerable in protecting basic human rights. Too many signs are warning us. The targeted bombing of civilian facilities, in particular hospitals and health workers, attacks on NGOs during their humanitarian missions, have become a bitter reality since a few years. But the next step of dehumanization is threatening our societies much deeper, I think. Politics of isolationism and exclusion, an aggressive and racist rhetoric are gaining terrain and threaten insidiously but deeply the legitimacy of humanitarian action. When life-saving actions in the Mediterranean Sea are not only practically stopped, but also criminalized, then a very thick red line is crossed again. The strategies of exclusion have a high human cost. In refugee camps also in Europe, children, women and men live in absolutely unacceptable conditions. In Libya, the migrants are maintained in conditions remembering slavery. Some populists try to sell us that this is defending our identity and is necessary for the survival of our culture and of our values. Is human dignity not the most fundamental value for all human beings? Human rights were born in our societies out of the worst human crisis as a reminder that they should never happen again. Today, some people and many unscrupulous politicians are turning their back from those fundamental lessons of history and are driving us to very dark times if we don't stop them. We cannot let them avert attention from the real challenges of the world that our world is facing today. The protracted crisis in countries such as Syria, Yemen, the Central African Republic, and many others. A growing gap between rich and poor, and increasingly precarious living conditions for parts of the population, even in the Western world, as well as the many obstacles preventing billions of people from accessing the necessary health care. The humanitarian community, by chance, is big and strong. Just look at the number of us being here and the growing number of participants every year in the Congress. Look at the growing response to large-scale crises all over the world, and look at the emerging strength of the local actors. Let's continue to take responsibility and be accountable to the most vulnerable. Let's feel proud of being committed to reducing human suffering. And if you don't like the word proud, at least let's be conscious and convinced that reduce human suffering and promote human dignity is our duty. Thank you very much, and enjoy the Congress. Enjoy the Congress, and let's start now with the real discussions and debates. Therefore, let me invite on the stage the participants of the next, or the first discussion, Ms. Degan Ali, Executive Director of Adeso, as Chair Nelke Manders, General Director and Chair of the Operational Center Amsterdam at MSF Holland, and as well as Christina Bennett, the Head of Humanitarian Policy Group at Overseas Development Institute, ODI. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Welcome to all of you in Berlin, and also welcome to those who are joining via live stream. Really excited to be here with you and to have 2 days of no doubt inspiration, joint reflection on an important theme, advocating for human dignity in crisis. And there are great thinkers, great speakers, great doers. Two of those ladies are sitting here and will soon get the floor to inspire us. But before I will introduce them to you, I would like to introduce you to Maria. Maria is not her real name. Maria is not here with us in Berlin. Maria is a woman I met a year ago in the detention center in Libya. And I want her to be with us. Maria, sorry, there needs to be another background slide for Maria. I met her a year ago, actually not in a detention center in Libya, but in a hospital where MSF, my colleagues, referred her to because she had collapsed in a detention center. I was really proud to join my colleagues, my Libyan colleagues, working together with Sudanese and Dutch colleagues, who had negotiated access to what I call hell houses. I've worked in many crisis situations all over the world. I never saw something like that when I entered a detention center in Libya. And in those detention centers, we provide care, and in a very beautiful way, bringing a spark of light in a bit dark place. But when you are able to talk with someone that lives that life in a detention center, and you cannot talk there, but you can talk with the people who we refer to a hospital, and you listen, it's hard to not think back of it every day. And Maria, when I met her, this young lady of 23 years, who had fled Darfur, because her village was tortured by drought year after year, and she was looking for a better life for her and her husband, eager to start a family. And when they, with the help of smugglers, arrived in Libya, and they were just pulled apart when they were taking a boat. So her husband went on another boat, and her boat was stopped by the Libyan Coast Guard, so she was brought back to a detention center, trying to survive. But when I met Maria, and that's what I want to share with you, Maria actually straight away asked me, "Did you meet my friend in the detention center?" And my friend, I'm worried for her. She's mentally not strong, and she's the one that the guards are playing with time and again. And she explained me what playing actually meant, and it was amongst other gang rapes. She was so concerned, and I didn't know. I was not sure whether I had met her friend. And then I asked, but I also really want to know how you are doing. And there she held it, and she cried. And she shared her story that I will not share with you, but I hope that none of us have to live what she lived. But for me, Maria needs to be here, because that, to me, is human dignity. Right? To first ask, when you are living this type of experience, to first ask how your friend is doing, that you met in a detention center and that you have been trying to protect, that you're now worried for. That's human dignity in crisis. So I'm happy that Maria is here now with us. Before I introduce two other great ladies. My name is Nelke Manders. I'm the General Director of MSF Holland and the Chair of Operational Center Amsterdam. A great partnership with colleague from MSF Germany and MSF UK, Ireland and India. And together we ensure that we are working in 25 crisis missions, more than 70 projects with 11,000 great colleagues. Very quickly, because introducing people, but a quick feel who's in the room. Maybe you can raise hands. Who of you is actually a student? Woo! Lots of hands for those on live stream. Who calls him or herself a humanitarian worker? Can I see hands? Also, quite a lot, but less. Who is born in what we call the global north? Majority. Global south. The minority. But welcome. Native English? A few. Who in the last week has discussed the power structures in our humanitarian aid sector? Quite a lot. So have I. I rejoined MSF a year ago. Before I did other beautiful work. I never talked so much about power structures as the past year. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And so we have papers circulating in MSF called a call for change, and there was a lot of debate going on. Well, I will start, and I will not talk too long, but I am super proud to be back with MSF. I think what we're trying to do as MSF through these, in total, 45,000 colleagues is incredible. 90% of my colleagues are recruited locally in the crisis areas, trying to support their peers living in crises. And the mix of people working with the same aim, working with also the civil society, local partners, most of the projects with the Ministry of Health, it's impressive. And at the same time, being proud, but also having these doubts every now and then. Like, there is power imbalance. Are we facing all our blind spots? And you can't face your blind spots if you don't know that it's a blind spot, right? So I'm sure that these ladies are going to share a few more blind spots that we as MSF also have to be aware of and deal with. So I'm really happy that this Congress opens with a locally led humanitarian response. And who better can give a keynote address than Ms. Degan Ali. So she really is helping us to change the way that we see development and aid. In 2003, she designed and oversaw the delivery of the first large-scale aid distribution program in Africa implemented by an NGO rather than a government agency. Under her leadership, Adeso has since pioneered and championed market-based and dignified solutions to aid that have resulted in cash transfers first becoming a standard aid response. Most recently, Ms. Degan Ali has been an active member of the Leadership Council for the Network of Empowered Aid Response, NEAR, a network of southern NGOs with a mission to reshape the top-down humanitarian and development system to one that's locally driven and owned. After she has given her keynote address, I will ask another very interesting lady to comment on what she heard. And that's Christina Bennett, the head of the Humanitarian Policy Group of the Overseas Development Institute. Also more than 20 years of valuable experience in humanitarian policy and practice. And currently leading a 2-year research project on local humanitarian action. Also you yourself, be reminded, please be invited to share your comments, ideas, inspiration on Facebook and Twitter. It's not on the background slide anymore, but use the hashtag HCBerlin. And be assured that there will be space to ask questions yourself also through live stream. So I will try to chair that there is sufficient time for that. But give a warm hand to Ms. Degan Ali.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. I'm very honored to be here. This is my first Humanitarian Congress in Berlin, and it's a great opportunity to share with you my thoughts around this issue of dignity, local leadership, locally driven response. And I'm sorry, I'm going to apologize early for focusing heavily on MSF. The reason why is because initially I thought, by having not been here before, I thought this conference really was a conference of all the MSF sister organizations. So I thought it was an internal MSF conference. Having said that, you know, I just wanted to particularly focus on MSF because I think MSF is obviously a very, very well-respected institution that really represents so many things that are both wrong and right in the humanitarian system. So having said that, I also wanted to first start off by really commenting on the noble work of being a medical doctor, of this entire, within the humanitarian sphere, I would say medical practitioners and those in the medical arena really are not only healing scars, physical scars, but in the process of healing the physical scars, they get insight into real deep trauma and other scars, other trauma that people are experiencing. And the story of Maria, I think, is a great example of that. And I think for people like us who might distribute cash or build shelter or whatever, don't really get that kind of deep insight into the human psyche and what people are going through that medical practitioners do. So I think because of that, the medical field, I think, is a bit different than the rest of the humanitarian system. And I think you guys are some of the most courageous people for doing the kind of work that you do. I don't know if I could sit and hear a Maria story over and over and over and over and over again in different countries for many, many years. I just don't know if I would have the ability to do that. So I really applaud you for that courage that you do. So having said that, I just want to talk about what is now this hot topic called localization. It's an old topic. It's now just been given a new word, which I'm not really quite happy with. I think the word itself has problems, but localization, I think, is really about what we are talking about here, which is dignity. How do I come into a space where people are in need and have become the unfortunate victims of either a natural disaster or conflict and provide them solidarity? That, to me, is what it should be. How do I show that I'm here as a fellow human being, that I'm here to support them, that I'm here to provide them either assistance in whatever they think is most important for them? Unfortunately, dignity has been removed from the humanitarian system. It has really been transformed into a system of beggars and those with money and power. Whether it's in the media, in how we fundraise and appeals of these emaciated children and pictures of, you know, that dark continent of Africa or people in Asia who, you know, these things that compel people in the North to give money, the kind of images that we use, to the actual way we do work in the communities. There's a huge, as earlier mentioned, power dynamics that play out in the humanitarian system. And those power dynamics, unfortunately, end up really looking like where we create a system where the voice and the needs of those who we are supposed to be in solidarity with and supposed to be helping are completely ignored. We make decisions for people in Washington, in Berlin, in London, for people in the refugee camps of Bangladesh or in Somalia. To me, that's the problem with the system. There's a big problem with the system when we are actually not sitting there saying, what do you need? How can we help you take the leadership? This idea that we are the ones who are the most important, the center of the response is us, whether we're MSF, whether we're Oxfam, whether we care. When in reality, the first responders, the most important responders in any crisis are the people themselves first, and their community members, their loved ones, their family, the business people in the local community, the traders. Those are the most, you guys are not there. It takes months for you guys to arrive, to really arrive. The money might be mobilized, the people might be mobilized to a capital, but to actually arrive to the location where the needs are, sometimes it takes months. So how do we shift this system to be really more dignified and truly be more locally led? What does an ideal model look like in a response? And when I talk about localization, I don't mean just civil society. I mean, how do we do procurement locally and support local businesses instead of shipping in goods and services from France or Belgium for a response in Syria? I mean, that to me is crazy. I just heard that from a Turkish NGO who was trying to partner with, I won't name the name, of an agency. And they were saying that they didn't want to procure anything in Turkey, next door neighbor. Yes, you can't find some of these goods. I understand the medical field is highly specialized. There's a need to ensure high quality. But I was like, Turkey, you have all of this medicine and goods. Why can't, the guy said, I don't understand. They wanted to bring the items from France and Belgium. So this is, what does an ideal response look like? For me, the ideal response really should be about, first of all, where the government, I'm not talking about a conflict, I think we need to separate natural disasters and conflict. Let's talk about Indonesia, for instance. Indonesia, now the government is taking very strong leadership and saying, we don't need the international community to come in and basically overwhelm us, which is what happened in Nepal, which is what happened, it used to happen in Philippines. They're actually putting their foot down and saying enough is enough, which I'm completely happy to hear, to be honest with you. So if I'm a humanitarian actor and I want to respond and I feel a moral obligation, which we all do as humanitarians, as human beings, we all feel a need to respond to such a crisis, I would actually be talking to the government and talking to civil society locally and saying, what do you need from me in London, in Berlin? How can I help you? What is it that you want? Let me write a blank check and let me help you do that and make that happen. I'm going to come and support you and provide this assistance. Sometimes the organizations become too overwhelmed and they can't absorb all of this money. And sometimes we're also irresponsible in turning an organization that may have only been $500,000 organization into becoming all of a sudden overnight a $10 million organization. And then later we say, oh, they weren't compliant and they had problems. Well, first of all, what have we done to support those civil society organizations so that they can be compliant? We know a crisis will happen in Indonesia in a few more years. We know another earthquake will happen in Nepal. God forbid, but we probably do. We probably are fairly assured by scientists it will happen. So what have we done to build these institutions for that future crisis? Pretty much nothing. We come in when the crisis happens, we do what we do, spend the money that the generous donors in the North have given us, and then we leave. We haven't left any real institutions behind, whether it's government, whether it's civil society, whatever it may be. I'm from Somalia. I'll tell you right now, MSF pulled out a few years back. And actually, let me start off by telling you that MSF went into parts of Somalia that nobody else would go. I was in Keersmaeker in 2007-08, doing an assessment, trying to come in and open an office in Keersmaeker. There was no INGO there. MSF was the first INGO. I was there when the MSF staff, including a northerner and someone else, I think from Kenya, I can't remember which country he was from, were doing an assessment to try to open their office. I was shocked to see a white man in Keersmaeker. I was really shocked. I was like, what? You're here? He's like, yeah. I was really shocked by the bravery of MSF. to actually take that risk to put their northern staff in Keersmaeker and open that hospital. They did that. Unfortunately, they paid a huge price for that because that staff member was eventually killed. And we hear that often, unfortunately, with the emergencies becoming more and more complex. Both internationals from the north and local staff are constantly the victims and the first ones to suffer in these crises. But at the same time, when MSF pulled out of Somalia because of these kinds of incidents, nobody knew in the international system in Somalia how to take over these hospitals. Nobody had the capacity. There wasn't a local institution in all the years that MSF was in Somalia that MSF had built to take over these hospitals. For me, that's really a sad situation. With all the resources and all the knowledge that MSF had, it should have put in place the systems so that a local actor, a local civil society organization, I can understand in a country like Somalia or countries like Syria that you're not going to be able to work effectively with the Ministry of Health. Ideally, it should be a Ministry of Health in such situations. But if the Ministry of Health is not an option, why hasn't this institution put in place a local civil society actor that could have effectively managed that hospital? So everybody had to turn around and beg another INGO to take the risk of going to Keersmaeker where another INGO had lost staff. Who would do that? They didn't. It took a long, long time to get some of those hospital systems up and running in those areas. So this is the sad reality of not doing local capacity and local leadership, is that we are left in a situation where we wait for the Northerners to support us and respond, we wait for them to leave something behind, we wait for them to make a decision whenever they want to leave us behind, and we are there holding things together, but we're not left with the resources and we're not left with the capacity, especially in the medical field. Medical field is not something easy that anybody can take over. Adeso as an NGO cannot manage a hospital. So this is the kind of situation we're left. We're constantly waiting and we're being passive recipients of your aid. We're not in the driver's seat. And that's what we need to change. We need to get local communities and local civil society actors and local governments to be in the driving seat of the response. And it's only that in that situation that we build sustainable institutions that are there when you guys leave us behind. Now, I'll talk about humanitarian principles. There is this constant feedback. We heard the negative, we've constantly heard the negative reasons why localization is bad. Corruption, local actors are corrupt. Well, I'm sorry, but if you work with the same local actor for 20 years in Turkana, and they're still corrupt, and you still can't leave Turkana and leave them behind after working with them 20 years, what is wrong with you? What does it say about you? 20 years, you've been in Turkana, and you haven't left an institution that can be compliant and have due diligence? I think it speaks more about you than it does about the local actor. But anyways, I won't go into that too much, but neutrality, humanitarian principles, impartiality. This is one of the arguments that are constantly talked about. And it's actually one of the ones that makes me quite upset, I must say. I'm sorry, but I can handle being humiliated and constantly being told that you're corrupt because you're from the South and you're a person of color. I've kind of dealt with that. What I can handle is the idea that somehow, as a human being, that I will see people suffering and I will not be able to respond. I will somehow take ethnic, tribal allegiances and make that more of a priority than be a human being. That questioning of my humanity is a thing that I can't handle. And that was what happens when you say to someone in Syria that you are not neutral and you can't be impartial. That's what happens when you say to people in Somalia that you cannot be neutral. As Adeso, I opened offices in areas outside of my clan areas. I've opened offices and supported communities outside of my clan areas where even my own clan said to me, why are you doing that? Why are you taking Adeso there? I said, well, it's the right thing. Nobody's there. It's the right thing to do. So this idea that somehow we can't go above, beyond our own sense of tribalism, communitism, or whatever it is that you call, to be able to be a human being first, that's, to me, really wrong. That somehow you guys come from the North, come from Europe, and you're more likely to be more objective and more neutral than I am. There's something wrong with that. But let's just forget about what it says morally about me when I'm accused of not being more neutral. Let's talk about the practicalities of this argument, the reality of this argument. The reality of this argument in crises such as Syria, such as Somalia, such as Iraq, is that MSF, Oxfam, CARE, whoever it may be, is working mostly remotely with local community, local actors, local staff. So what's the difference between Mohammed, who's a staff member of MSF in Syria, and Mohammed, who's a staff member of a local NGO? When a security incident happens in MSF in Syria, who does it go to? It goes to Mohammed. Mohammed, help us. How do we solve this? What do we do? That's who they go to. They don't go to their headquarters. They go to the local one who has the knowledge to understand the intricacies of that complex situation to give them advice. That's who they go to. They don't go to John. They don't go to Frank. They go to Mohammed. And what is the difference between these two individuals? In my opinion, there is none. But it's okay. One moment they get a salary, they're on the payroll of MSF, they're neutral. On the other hand, they get the salary of a Syrian NGO, and they're not neutral. This is just some really imaginary and crazy fabrication that we're making in our mind. These walls exist. They don't exist. There's no such thing. I have seen internationals, Northerners, Americans and Europeans in Somalia. The first question they ask me, what clan are you? Why do you care? I'm Somali. No, what clan are you? Because they want to put me in a box. When I meet a Somali, the first question I ask them is not what clan are you? But when I meet internationals, 9 times out of 10, the first thing they'll ask me is what clan am I? Because they want to put me in a box. They want to already assume that I have allegiance to this group or that group. So who is actually acting in a non-neutral way and making assumptions about who we are as people? And then, about this argument of neutrality. I think that the reality is that it erodes a real thing on trust. It's really difficult to have a trusting, healthy relationship between the communities and your local staff if you're constantly preaching this idea that they're not neutral. And let me tell you something. If neutrality means that I am on the side of the oppressors, I am happily label myself being not neutral. If neutrality means I sit there and I let these humanitarian principles hamper me from helping people who are being bombed, then I don't think neutrality is serving any purpose. Frankly, it's not serving any purpose. If neutrality is making us sit in Damascus so we do nothing, then I don't think neutrality is helping us. I think we are on the side of oppressors, and we are then taking sides. We ourselves are not neutral. If you sit in Damascus, and because of neutrality, and you don't do what needs to be done to help those people being bombed in Idlib, or wherever it may be, then you've already taken a side, and you're already not neutral. But it's okay to point the finger at those of us from the South who are Muslims, who wear hijabs, or whatever, from Zimbabwe, and say, you're not neutral. There's a huge hypocrisy and double standards in this terminology of neutrality. Lastly, I would just like to end by saying that in this field, we have so much tragedy. We have so much just shockingly brazen and unimaginable ways to dehumanize each other, to do the most unimaginable things to each other. I think for me, what is the most important, compelling issue about localization is about being humble, having humility, and recognizing that we don't have the answers and we need each other. And recognizing that true solidarity really means that we have to stop this idea that we are better and we have the power and you just do whatever we want. That's not what solidarity is, and projectizing everything and saying, I have the money. Money is not everything. I have the knowledge. I know the community is better than you. I know the security problems that you will create coming from the north and not knowing anything. How many times have we as Adeso solved security issues created by internationals in our communities? And then they come to us and they say, we don't know, they're gonna attack us, help us. This is not my NGO, these are internationals from INGOs, because they've done every single thing in the wrong way. So when it's convenient, you come to us. But when it's not convenient, we're told you're not being neutral, you're told you're being fraudulent, we can't trust you. You have to choose. I don't mind having an argument with someone who says, I do not support localization and I never will. Fine, you stand there, no problem. But on the one hand, you put on a hat saying, I'm your ally, I'm in solidarity with you. But on the other hand, you do everything possible to undermine local capacity and local leadership and continue the status quo where you have the resources and you projectize everything. And there's no real partnership and there's no trust. Then that to me is just hypocrisy. So I plead to you that we have to have courage and we have to have humility. And we have to create real trust. And to do that, we have to just stop with all of this nonsense of trying to dehumanize people and call each other things under codes of neutrality and impartiality and fraudulent and all of that. Because that's what it is. It's just code for other language that I won't even get into. So I implore you, please be courageous. Please ask the right questions. Please let local people, give them their dignity, give them their humanity, and be a real trusting partner. That's what I ask of you. And you as students, most of you are students here, you will have a long career ahead of you, inshallah, God willing. Please let that career be one that you're proud of. Let it be a career that you can look back on and say, you know what? I left these communities in a far better position than when I came in. And I let them lead, and I heard them, and I listened to them. And I created real friendships, and I understood the culture, and I did more listening than talking. You see, that is your education. That's far better, and you will understand what I'm talking about when you hit 60 or 50. You will understand. When you can say, my master's degree and my PhD was from those people and not from a university, that is when you will have your real education and your real PhD. But to do that, to really benefit and get a proper degree from those communities, you have to humble yourself. Thank you.
And rightfully so, there is a long applause. Thank you. Of course, I'm tempted to talk, but I will listen. And I will first ask you, Christina. You know each other, you also worked with each other, and you're doing your research. I would really be interested to hear your reflections.
Sure, thanks very much. And I have the unenviable task of having to talk after Degan's moving keynote speech. But maybe just as a bit of background, I work for the Humanitarian Policy Group in London, and we have been engaged in this 2-year research project on looking at local humanitarian action, what it is, what it looks like on the ground, how are people responding to it, what's working and what's not. We're about 3/4 of the way through the research, so I don't have kind of complete findings for all of you, but I think what I'll talk about now, and in response to what Degan has just said, a little bit about what our initial impressions are, about what the research is telling us sort of 9 months into the process. I think some of the things I would definitely agree with Degan on, and specifically how we have approached the debate itself, how we have approached this idea of local humanitarian action as localization, an agenda set by senior officials at a global conference, and setting that agenda almost as a form of power in and of itself. Localization as a term implies power, power going from one to another, power being bestowed from those who have it to those who don't. And that is a problematic way to start this discussion. We've also, it's also about the language that we use, both in the term localization, but also in the language that we use in our daily work, in our meetings, in who speaks first, what language they speak in, because whoever does speak first sets the narrative and dominates the debate. So in speaking first about localization and defining the debate as localization, it becomes a victim of its own kind of beginnings, of its own prophecy. It's also played out in the way that we speak of capacity, and Degan mentioned capacity building as a means of sustaining support in crisis contexts beyond the term of an international humanitarian organization. We are obsessed with a capacity. Who has it, who doesn't have it, what capacity means, who is capacity for, how do we get it, how do we build it, how do we lose it? But really what we should be thinking of is capacity as multifaceted. It comes in many different forms, it's got many different layers, different people have it, and to different degrees for different purposes. It's also multi-directional. We don't build capacity. Capacity goes both ways. Capacity can flow. So I think we are obsessed with it in the wrong way. And even in terms of mentoring and training, whether it is mentoring and training to fill out forms for our own organization's compliance mechanisms, for the compliance mechanisms of our partners, or whether it's for investment in those organizations in their own right. We, in bestowing capacity, in building capacity in others in any form, are making organizations less agile, less differentiated, and more homogeneous in the way that we work. And I'll give you an example. We did some research in Ukraine a couple of years ago where we interviewed a bunch of local organizations who were working in the Donbass region. And these organizations had started out as sort of activist movements and then had become humanitarian organizations when the fighting broke out. And more they were being incorporated into international meetings and international cluster systems. They were being supported by international organizations financially, all the things that we set out in our localization agenda. But what they were feeling was a huge loss of identity, that they had felt they had lost their purpose, their connection with their people, and in fact, their USP, their unique selling point, what they brought to the table as different from what international actors have. The second issue, or the second problem I see with the localization agenda, and this is maybe where I differ a little bit from where Degan is coming from, is that I feel like we've been setting up a false and unhelpful dichotomy by talking about local versus international in all of its forms. We talk about that most in financial terms. The Grand Bargain talks about giving, 25% to local organizations directly. And we've been doing a bunch of research, in fact, with NEAR, the NEAR network, on whether or not local organizations are, in fact, getting more money directly as the result of those Grand Bargain promises. But what that's ended up doing is setting us in competition with one another. So we as a sector are already competitive. And that competition already makes it very difficult for us to work with one another as NGOs, as organizations, because we're all competing for the same pot of funds. Throw in the local organizations, and actually we're making that worse. And that's not actually a theory, that's actually being borne out in practice. We were just in Somalia doing research on local organizations there, and in fact found that local organizations had increased in the amount of money they were getting directly from donors, from about 10% to about 12%. But what we also found was a proportionate decrease in the amount of funding that NGOs were getting in Somalia in the same time period. So this suggests that international NGOs are losing in the localization debate. And is that a really helpful tension to set up in a reform process that's supposed to make humanitarian action stronger overall? And also by setting up local versus international, are we just negating the fact that a more devolved, more contextual, more appropriate humanitarian action must take many forms? When you think about protection, the international approach to protection is a more secular one, is a more professional one, and particularly when you're talking about medical assistance. But if you talk to local organizations or other types of organizations, protection is more communal, it's more religious. It has roots in what the community can do to self-protect one another. Similarly, dignity. We've been looking into the concept of dignity, and I'm glad Degan raised it. I mean, as the international community, we think of dignity as dignity for the individual, a human right. But if you talk to Rohingya in Cox's Bazar, they think of dignity as dignity for their community, as mutual respect, as thinking of the other before they think of themselves. And I thought that was really interesting what you said about Maria, that she was asking about her friend before she talked about herself. And that is something that has been borne out in our research. So success, what we've seen as successful humanitarian action is not one that is based on a specific approach to humanitarian action, whether it's highly professional, highly international, highly local, highly communal. It is about the trust and relationships between organizations that work together and the trust and relationships between organizations and the people they serve. And that brings me to the point about principles, and in particular the principle of neutrality that Degan has raised. If any of you read the report that we put out a couple of years ago called Time to Let Go, we talked about humanitarian principles and the fact that as a sector, while humanitarian principles need to underpin every aspect of our work, we cannot create this exceptionalism between those who are principled, so those who are card-carrying humanitarians, and the others, because that delegitimizes what are legitimate forms of relief. So when talking about neutrality in particular, I think that all of us have a really tricky relationship with neutrality, and I wouldn't look at any organization, I don't think any of us, any organization, could say that in every place at all times they are a neutral actor, nor should they be. We are all advocating on the part of humanity. And for that, we aren't neutral and we aren't apolitical. We are advocating for people in need. But I would also say that what is important to people affected by crisis is not an organization's neutrality. It's not what side they're on. It's not their identity and who they represent all the time. It's actually whether they do good programming. Again, in some research we were doing in Ukraine, we looked at local organizations' ability to get access as compared to those of international organizations, and found that people's access or organizations' access had nothing to do whether they were international or local. It all had to do with whether they were delivering timely, relevant programming and whether those populations trusted in that programming and those organizations' ability to do the work. So I would suggest if we do want to think about humanitarian principles, that neutrality isn't really that principle to seize on. If anything, it's impartiality. Our ability to work together to cover populations in need, to plug the blind spots in ways that we can all add value to the humanitarian response. So maybe just to close on my reactions, you know, I think what we're all saying up here actually is that in our current language, in our current framing, in our current way of setting out this debate, we are losing sight of our larger goals, which are about reform, self-reliance, complementarity. And at the basis of that is our power power differentials, and I was very happy to see that most of you in this audience had discussed power in the humanitarian sector in the last week. That is quite amazing to me, actually, from the time that I've been working in this sector. We have to be willing to sort of upend our assumptions about the meanings and practices of humanitarianism, not to debunk everything we've been doing, not to denigrate all of the good work that we've been doing now and in the past, not to over-idolatize or over-idealize the notion of local humanitarian action as superior, but really to understand how we frame the conversation in a way, how we diagnose the problem in a way that creates the space for many and alternative ways of conducting ourselves as humanitarian action and flexing our models to be able to adapt to all of those circumstances. Thanks very much.
That's another key strength, to be able to be concise and capture so much in a reaction, in a short reaction. Thank you for that. So you talk about who speaks first, capacity building, and actually two ways of capacity building. The false dichotomy between local, international, different perspectives on concepts like protection, dignity, keyword, trust, build on each other's strengths, add value together, right? I'm sure that in the drawings, because often drawings and pictures speak more than all these words, so later we can also look at what is going on over there. It's intriguing. I have a lot of questions, but you all came here to meet these ladies, and for sure you will have questions. So I actually would like to open the floor for questions. Also the people joining via live stream, you can share your comments and they will be read out loud here. So please use that opportunity, Twitter, Facebook. But maybe first in the audience, who would like to ask a question? I know I also have to absorb a little bit what I heard. So I see a lot of people like, whew. Something to chew on, which is great, but I see questions. I see one, you're already walking over there. Yes, please.
Thank you. Yes, good morning, great to be here. I'm just quite intrigued by this. We've seen some critiques of fundamental principles. I wonder if it's time, do we think it's time to bracket or put to one side the principle of neutrality? Are things changing so much on the ground that it's time to let go of what is often a procedural principle and ask if we need to be more engaged? Thank you.
Thank you for introducing. I should have asked
I beg your
first.
pardon. My name's Julian Sheether, and I'm partly with an ethicist from the British Medical Association and MSF. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Maybe collect two questions, and then we'll ask you to share your reflections. One question from over there.
Yeah, hello, I'm Ben from Iran.
Sorry, let's. The microphone is over there. I will come back to you later.
Okay.
Sorry for that.
Yes, no problem. Hi, Alistair Scott from Humanitarian here in Bavaria in Germany. Well, not here in Bavaria, but you know what I mean. Thank you for the very refreshing and, yes, not at all, you know, we're all chums here together. Keynote speech, it was very eye-opening for me. What I found difficult, or what I would be interested in, the sentence that you said, Ms. Ali, about what are we doing wrong? What am I doing wrong as a northern organization when my partner is still corrupt after 20 years? You know, I would just be interested to hear your views on this, because the question is, for me, how do I influence a partner positively without saying it has to change, you know, without it being a hostile takeover or putting them, you know, in a position where I'm the boss and being very clearly the boss, when we really want to be in a position of participation and, yeah, a real partnership, and not in this power structure paradox which we're trying to avoid.
Thank you. Let's take one more with the mic.
Thank you. This is Ben from IRIN. My question is, why can it not be a zero-sum? Why does everybody have to win? Why can't the northern international groups accept that perhaps their cake will be smaller?
Okay, thank you. So let's start with these three and then do next round. I'm looking at Christina, maybe to start on the notion that Julian shared with us on neutrality.
Sure, thanks for that question. You know, I think when we were thinking about the principles, and at the time the discussion was about reopening them and changing them and adding to them and detracting from them, we considered whether or not the principles writ large or neutrality or individual principles were necessary anymore. And I think we came to the conclusion that they are. And they must remain foundational to humanitarian work because that is a very solid basis from which we all need to operate. But I think what we were also saying is that the principles should not set us apart. Well, they should guide our work and our operations. They should not set us apart as superior because we have them and we try to abide by them to other forms of relief. Organizations that provide good forms of emergency assistance or effective emergency assistance, but are perhaps not neutral, shouldn't be minimized as actors that we shouldn't be dealing with or aren't humanitarians, quote unquote. So I think it's not about getting rid of the principle of humanity. I think it's about deprioritizing it or understanding what it's good for and what it's not good for. Maybe on Ben's question on winners and losers and whether or not it should be a zero-sum game. You know, I think I've always been advocating that the formal humanitarian system should be rethinking its role and in light of shrinking resources should probably scale back in terms of its size, its footprint, and the enormity of the task that it sets out to do. So I would agree with you that maybe a smaller share of the pie is something that humanitarian organizations should be thinking about. I guess what I was saying is that if we set this up, local versus international, as a competition, then there is even less there is less of an incentive to work together than there is now. And then the conversation about localization becomes about who's winning and who's losing. And I think that's incredibly unhelpful.
I mean, I agree with you, Christina, on that. I think that we are not trying to say that it is us against them kind of situation. But at the same time, I think what we are trying to say, we're trying to speak our truth. And our truth is painful to hear if you're on that side of the stage today or of this hall today, if you're from the north. And that truth means that it's not an equal relationship. It's not a relationship of real partnership. It's not a trusting relationship. And that gets really uncomfortable. And we can, whatever you call it, whether it's racism, neo-colonial, whatever you call it, but it's not an equal, real, true, genuine partnership. And to get to that, we have to speak the truth. We have to understand you have to understand where we're coming from, where our pain and our frustration is coming from. We have to break this, this really idealized, very altruistic position that most internationals coming in for really good, genuine reasons. They want to help people. We're all humans. We all want to help. The reasons why you're in the field is the same reason why I'm in this field. But somehow, because you're altruistic and you're willing to risk your life, and because you're willing to go and suffer in South Sudan and be bitten by all types of insects in a tent, doesn't mean that I can't tell you that there are real power issues. It doesn't mean that altruism somehow gets you a green pass from behaving in a very unhealthy way. You see, so we need to have that conversation and that discourse, I believe, to get to a position where we can now forge that real, true partnership and get to a position of real solidarity. So you have to, I think, go through that painful process to get to a healthy place, in my honest opinion. This comment about power, power and accountability. How do you work with a partner without overexerting your power and ensure that they really are compliant and can meet due diligence? I mean, Christina said, there is huge amount. We keep talking as if local actors have zero capacity. The things that are not in a form is the things that are least valued, that are not monetized. But they are the most important. You can have all the money in the world and try to do a good program in the field, and you can still fail because you don't understand the context and you don't understand the communities. The thing that is most valuable is your knowledge of the communities and what people need, and understanding the complexities and the challenges that you will face. That's the thing that is least valued in any due diligence or compliance form that an auditor looks at or a donor looks at. But it's the most powerful thing, and it's the most important thing. So what I'm saying is that the relationship between an INGO in Turkana with a local actor after 20 years, I want my donor INGO partner to challenge me. But I also want them to ask me, what is it that you need? There is no local actor that will not say, I need this X support, because my goal, my vision for my institution is to get to Y. And I need you to help me through that process. And if it means that you have to give me unrestricted funding, and this is a big issue, is unrestricted funding. We expect local actors to have these great systems, but we don't give them the money to do that. You guys get money from your donor governments. You guys, British NGOs, have been getting partnership agreements from the British government for the past 30 years. Mercy Corps or Save the Children or Oxfam's capacity didn't develop overnight instantaneously. It's through this government investment, through unrestricted funding over the past 30 years, and these agreements that have helped these NGOs get to that level. We don't have our national government supporting us. We are in a situation where even our 7% or 10% unrestricted funding is zero. I have had an NGO, a Nepalese NGO, tell me in the Nepalese crisis that their INGO partner refused to give them any overheads. And so as a result, they were forced to work for free. What does that mean? That we are subsidizing your work. We are actually invisible donors. Yeah, that's the reality. And that has happened to me personally as well. I have been in many situations where you, an NGO, you, an agency, or an INGO have pushed Adeso to the point of having to eventually, I was able to walk away. I'm happy to walk away. I've done that many times when I couldn't afford to walk away, when he didn't have the money. But I did that because I just can't do it. I just can't implement a project when I know that it's the wrong thing to do. But many organizations are not able to walk away because they're in the middle of a crisis. They're in an earthquake, and they feel like these are their people. They're like, wait a minute, how can I be selfish and ask for money for rent and for my salary when my community is dying and is suffering? So you feel this moral obligation to just take whatever is given to you. But at the same time, we say they have to be compliant and they have to have capacity. How do you get capacity unless you have the money to hire those people at a competitive, marketable? The same NGO told us that 70% of their staff were gone in 1 month after the Nepalese crisis. 70% of their staff were taken by INGOs and UN. So we are being purposefully decapacitated by the same actors that say you don't have capacity. Because we can't afford the market rates. We can't afford to pay people $2,000 in Nepal. We don't have the money for that, because why? The same groups that are working with us are not willing to give us the unrestricted funding to do that. So, so it's kind of almost after a while when you see this constantly happening in Liberia, happening in Somalia, happening in Nepal, happening in Indonesia, when you see the same behavior and same actions over and over again, that's why you get angry. That's why you hear what you're hearing right now from me. And by the way, I'm tame compared to some of my colleagues from the South. If you're in a room, I swear, I wish you could be in a room, fly in the wall, and hear us when we're all together from many countries. NIR has done consultations all over the world. And when there's no northerner in the room, you will be shocked to hear some of the things that they say. How frustrated and angry people are. You see, so what I'm trying, I'm privileged because I have an American passport, I don't need a visa, and I can come here on the stage. Many of them can't come to these events because they can't get a visa. Just basic things like that. Just logistical issues. The WHS consultations, they were trying to say, we're going to include X number of people from the South. Many of those people from the South didn't come. Why? Because there are logistics nightmares of getting visas for people. I mean, we don't realize the privilege that we have. Just the freedom of movement is a privilege. Forget about all these other things. So this is what I'm saying. I'm saying real partnership comes from an understanding first and foremost where this frustration comes from, and really, really trying to do your best to address these gaps. 20 years of a relationship, I'll give you a good example. Oxfam Novib, Adeso was 1995, 96. We had a partnership with Oxfam Novib, the Dutch Oxfam. We told them that we needed 25% overheads to keep an office in Nairobi. You know what they said? They said, yes, we'll give it to you for 5 years. We'll give you a 25% overhead. That 25%, when I came in 2003, we didn't have an office in Nairobi. We didn't have HR systems. We didn't have finance systems. We had nothing. It was that 25% that allowed me to hire our first professional staff. It was that 25% that allowed me to build the HR systems for that institution. It was that 25% that allowed me to pay a salary for the first time regularly to the ED of that organization, who actually is my mother. She was not getting a salary for 20 years. Yeah? So it was that 25% that allowed me to grow that institution to the point that we competed against INGOs in 2012 and won a $45 million grant from USAID because of that 25% investment. And then what did they do? The next thing that they did is when they saw that we were growing, our capacity was growing, in 2008, 2009, they introduced us to the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They said, this is a great partner of ours. You don't need us as intermediaries, fund them directly. And they did. The Dutch did fund us. That's real partnership. You see, that's courageous to say that I'm willing to step back and not being an intermediary anymore. You have grown, you can handle this. You're okay. You can walk and run on your own. You don't need me to hold you anymore. That's real courage. 20 years, and you have not helped that partner and introduced him to DFID, your back donor? That's a failure, in my opinion.
And it's good when it feels uncomfortable, right? Because that's where the change is. I will abuse sitting on the stage to also ask a question. Linking what the two of you are saying, because it is about building on each other's strengths, right? And there's unfortunately so many needs in the world and still not enough capacity to even address that. So it's not that there is an abundance. So I'm always a little bit shying away from talking about competition and so on. I mean, talking from my own experience, we are sometimes in places when there's literally nothing. There is the community. And I think a unique strength of MSF is the luxury that built on solidarity, that actually so many people worldwide are willing to give a little bit of their private money to express their solidarity and enable these 45,000 people worldwide to work together and address needs in a humble way. So that's a unique strength, being impartial to address really the needs. 90% of the staff comes from the affected area itself. And it varies from indeed cleaners, drivers to surgeons, using the capacity to just address needs together. So it's that true concept of solidarity that we see. And then I hear you and sharing the experience in Keersmaeker in Somali. And you question, like, okay, you left. Happily we are back, but indeed we left. And you didn't raise the capacity to build a hospital, which is not our strength. MSF is not, we don't have people that are good in capacity building. So it is we hope that there are other actors that are going to build that capacity, but often they cannot come to Somali. So you say, like, when you are the only actor there working with the community, you have an obligation to build capacity and get that expertise there to work together. Could you elaborate a little bit on how that change, how you envision that change? Because it's on changing our roles and identities, right?
How can MSF do that? How it can leave capacity in a place like Keersmaeker? I think you can do many different things. You have to think out the box. Obviously, you could have found a medical NGO partner, or you could have helped found a local NGO if there wasn't one. But I know in Keersmaeker there are several that could have been developed to handle and take over that hospital in the years that you guys were there. So helping them to have the expertise over those years. So I think obviously that means on the MSF's part that it has to change the way it works fundamentally. Instead of being 100% deliverer services, you have to think about, okay, if there's a local actor or ministry that is there, how do I augment them, and how do I provide complementary service rather than take over? And if there is no capacity there, how do I go in, save lives initially, stabilize the situation, but over time bring in the required human resources to help me bring that capacity? So that means you have to restructure internally to do that, and obviously it'll have funding and financial implications. Or, in a place like Somalia, there are everything is privatized. Water, people are used to paying for water. People are used to paying for medical services. People are used to paying for many, many different things. One of the options could have been turning that hospital into a self-sustaining a private enterprise, a social enterprise, where the money is pumped back into the maintenance of the hospital, and finding some private businessmen that could have taken it over, with that intention of CSR and that kind of thing. I think there's many, many opportunities for MSF to have thought. There are people who are building hospitals in Somalia right now for private reasons to earn money. So if MSF had said, you know what, I'm going to go, I need help from Somalis to how do I get Keersmaeker businessmen to take over this hospital and make it a social enterprise, I think they would have done that as a way of giving sadaqah, going back to the community. I think they would have done that. So it's, so you just have to be creative, and you have to be willing to think differently about the humanitarian system. It's not just one size fits all solutions.
You wanted to?
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, I think, I think we've all been talking about sort of this mindset shift, and I would articulate that as moving from an idea that we as humanitarian actors are saviors to we as humanitarian actors are surrogates. We are temporary replacements for services at a time and place when people need it most. And I think if you think of things that way, all sorts of opportunities or all sorts of ideas come to mind as to how you might be able to support other capacity in those times when you are acting in that surrogate role. I mean, one is the example of the overheads that Degan brought up earlier. Another is, in the West, things like hospitals or medical centers serve as anchor institutions, right? They actually employ many, many people in communities in which they operate. So is there a way to integrate communities and local businesses into our supply chains when we are operating in these places by using their services, whether it's nursing or medical services or laundry, frankly, because all of that is going to be building the capacity of the local community. And finally, what's preventing us from embedding ourselves in organizations as we work as surrogates in those contexts? Why couldn't MSF doctors and nurses and others embed themselves in organizations that are already operating so that you're working very much in that surrogate role and not apart from it?
Thank you. I am aware that I invited people to also ask questions via Facebook and Twitter, so I'm doing a quick check whether they want to be read out loud. No, then I'm going to the mic to you. Can I please have a mic? And please introduce yourself first.
Hi, Hakan Bilgin. I'm the president of Médecins du Monde Turkey, and I have worked 10 10 years with MSF. I just wanted to, you know, what is a bit disturbing me here, it's that we understand all those dynamics of, you know, national organizations, international organizations, but what we're missing a bit, I think, is how important it is to have people like you and here who are really engaged and who are taking the decision to commit, you know, and go to wherever in the world to try to do something different. I think that is a very, very important point that we're a bit undermining because of those, you know, all the other issues. And I worked in Somalia and quite some time, you know, from Dinsor to Beledweyne to Keersmaeker. I took a plane from Mogadishu to Keersmaeker. We're talking about the Keersmaeker hospital. And I would like to also just honor our friends, Philippe Have, who've been killed in Mogadishu, and Dr. Kash. I understand that we have to have a discussion around, you know, the importance of collaborating, and I'm also happy to hear that there's a shift in MSF's policy on getting involved local NGOs, because it wasn't the case, you know, 10 years or 15 years ago. Now, when I was working, it's direct intervention, so it's a good news. But it's important for all the young people who are here to understand that all those challenges can be overcome. What is important is not to lose them so they can engage with the humanitarian environment.
Thank you very much. So that was a statement. Thank you for that statement, an important one. So who would like to engage? Where can I get from that side? Can you please hand the mic? Can you please introduce yourself?
Thank you very much. My name is Henry. I'm from South Sudan. I represent South Sudan Association of the Visually Impaired. I don't have a question. I just wanted to confirm what one of the panelists was saying there about, I have 2 points, one on capacity. The second point is on the issue of supporting local actors. Basically almost one point, or the issue of the corruption, I'll touch it a little bit. I'll just begin by what she said. One of the challenges that face national organizations or local organizations is that they may have the capacity, they may have the technical knowledge and the expertise, but resources is always one of the things that can hinder or facilitate their participation, especially in international forums like this. I personally missed a trip to New York 3 years ago because my organization couldn't afford to pay for my accommodation. So the organizers of the conference were going to pay for my flights, but because their budget couldn't cover everything, so I should have paid my accommodation. My organization should have done that, and I would have traveled. I needed to travel to Nairobi to get a US visa, so that would have meant spending a couple of weeks in Nairobi. So eventually I missed the trip because of that. I mean, that just tells you that I think for me, when we think about capacity, we shouldn't generalize it, but we should sit down. If I was an international NGO, I would sit down with the local organization and say, okay, what is it that you can do and what is it that you think you can't do? Because it may be that they have the knowledge, they have everything, but maybe they don't have the financial capacity. I couldn't have made it to Berlin for this conference if my trip wasn't sponsored. Savvy, the organization I represent, couldn't have paid for it. I actually don't know how much it cost to be in Berlin. The second thing I wanted to touch on is the issue of corruption. And of course, I think it's not to say that governments in Africa are not corrupt, because the government of South Sudan, I would tell you that it is very, very corrupt, and it must change. I stand by that. But I think when we look at corruption, we need to, I think it's about the systems, because corruption would be dealt with differently, I think, in a Western country, I would assume, and I think more rightly so, than it would be dealt with in a country like South Sudan, which has, of course, is being messed up, I would say, by politicians who don't know their job. But let me say this. Corruption is everywhere. in the global south and in the west as well. But I think the difference is how it is dealt with. And for example, what happened with Oxfam, with their staff being engaged, being involved with sexual exploitation, of course, that tells you that bad elements exist everywhere. But I think the way they are dealt with is what is different. Maybe in the West, because you have the systems in place, you can hold them to account. And whereas in the South, in most cases, maybe because of the failures, of course, of many governments, there it would be different. So I think, for me here, the issue of corruption would be, if the organization has continued to be corrupt for the last 20 years, then I think, yeah, I mean, we would really wonder why it's not changing, because yeah, I just think that we shouldn't generalize, but we should really get to the bottom of what it is that is making one organization incapable of doing something. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Harry, for being here. And it's great that you're now being here and that we can hear you. I look at the time and I am conscious that I can have one more question, and there are many more. So I'm also going to invite you later, while we have a tea or a coffee downstairs, to continue asking questions. But I'm going to do one in the middle to make it difficult for Marie and Marie, who are facilitating, to get there with the microphone. There's one in the middle, really eager, hand up the highest of the whole room, already for a while, so I think that needs to speak.
Hi, Richard from Noha Chronican. You mentioned engaging the young people, and I think the Noha cohort this year is 145 people or so. The program's sponsored by the European Commission, and we're soon going to be early career humanitarians. And I wondered how we can start our careers as equal partners and in solidarity, rather than as part of the inherent power dynamic.
So let's maybe first answer that question, and then we take one more. So, how to start and not straight away be part of that power dynamic, right? Who would like to react? Because I would love to react, but please.
Here's an easy one from me, because I wish that I had started out working this way. Go work for a local organization. Go pay your own airfare, or get someone to pay your airfare. Go work for a local organization, because then you will, you know, if you don't continue working for that local organization your entire career, you will at least have understood what it means to do so, and the various ways in which their experiences are different from ours in the international community.
You stole my answer, Christina. But yeah, but I would definitely echo that, and I would just add that we've had a lot of interns from the north, and I think I would say, I don't want to put words in their mouths, but I would say that it was probably one of the most pivotal experiences. For instance, there's a gentleman, a British young guy, who came to us straight out of university with no experience. And he was able to work with us in Kenya and then help us in South Sudan. And then later he moved and became the lead cash advisor for a large consortium in the Syria response. And then now he's with DFID. All his cash experience came from Adeso. That allowed him to get that Save the Children position and then move into Adeso. Similarly, we had another young woman, American, who came to us and got similar experience, and she became the technical lead for cash at a global level for Mercy Corps. So again, we have done knowledge transfer and built the capacity of Northerners, and we do that all the time. So I would really encourage you, and I think the other thing that it does is that they really, really understand what it means to be on the other side. They really get a real picture of the challenges, the resource constraints, just the daily kinds of frustrations that we're dealing with in the South. So I would definitely say that that should be now. And not only that, I think it's not just working for local organizations. I think we need to make that a premier type of thing to do. Why does everybody think that working for a UN agency is the top thing that you want to do, or working for a big INGO with a big name brand is the top thing? We need to make it just as hip and sophisticated to work for a local NGO as it is for these agencies.
Sometimes there's also something in speaking last, because I think start with a local NGO and then also work with MSF. Because it's this mutual capacity building and we are locally working side by side. So it's just every time, how can we have more flow? And it's a false dichotomy. So let's try to get rid of it and just work together, because there are too many needs. Degan, you said to me, like, I want to have one question of a woman. Rightfully so. So the last question will be given if you are lucky to be a woman. And there you are. There's one here. Thank you for bridging. There's the mic. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. My name is Lynn Masharia. I'm also a NOHA student. And thank you for the keynote and the addresses as well. I had a question. Right now you've responded with regard to the capacity building, or how you can join a local actor to understand the culture as well. But how do the local actors balance between maintaining the capacity that is built by those people that are trained in the, or join as an intern, or like the local staff, the capacity is built, but now maybe they use that as a springboard to join an international NGO. So it's like all the people that are trained, the capacity is moving back to the international organization. So how does the local actor still develop the structure to operate as an equal partner if most of the people are leaving when they get the capacity?
Thank you, and a very valid point that we are also discussing in MSF. So sometimes easy when you are as MSF in areas where there are no other actors, so you're building capacity together, and then we see that a lot of the people that we recruited from that area are actually jumping to organizations that pay more. So there is this whole dynamic, and there is a power of money, and there is, but rightfully so. Your question is, and I will try not to have the last word. Your question is, how can we ensure when capacity is built that then you can keep it, and that it's not taken in a way by INGOs that maybe are there and pay more, right? Both would like to answer, I see it.
Yeah, that's a hard one, I think. I don't have a ready answer for that, but I think if we think of capacity as multi-directional and multi-varied, multi-level, then I think we can think about careers in the humanitarian sector, whether you are from starting out in a local organization, starting out in an international organization, as any type of career, which is now much more networked than it ever has been. So if you think about it in terms of skills development, right? If you work for an organization where you have to try harder because nobody takes your meetings, because you're fundraising against all odds, because you're programming without the requisite money for security for your staff, you can take those skills that you've built perhaps in an under-resourced, smaller, maybe more local organization and transfer that to a larger organization where you bring all of that ingenuity to them, but then bring your experience in the larger organization back to building the capacity or building that smaller organization with all that you've learned in working for a larger place. I'm not being very articulate in this, but I think it's an idea that careers now should be networked, should be varied, and that we should all be working in and out of these organizations as we move through our careers, because each one of them gives us a different experience and a different set of skills. So that would apply to those starting out as local organizations and those starting out in international.
Thanks, Christina. Last word for you.
You know, I'm constantly asked by Northerners, why do you focus so much on money and this issue of financing and getting more resources to local actors? Well, the reality is that it's the money that allows us, the funding that allows us, as I already explained, to hire the right people for HR, hire the right people for finance, hire the right people for procurement and all of that. But it's also the money and being able to pay market rates that allows us to keep those people. So it's a vicious cycle where we get trainings, we get our staff to a certain level, we capacitate them, but we can't maintain their salary because the INGOs pay more, the UN agencies pay more, and so then they get removed. There's huge amounts of energy. I actually would like to do a study on how much energy and time and therefore money goes into developing capacity of staff by local actors, and then how much of those staff move out. I mean, it's natural. People want to go up in their career, but as I said earlier, why is up only mean INGO and UN? Why doesn't up also mean going to another local NGO? I would be very happy and proud to see that one of my staff went to another local NGO in Kenya. I would be very happy, but that's not what happens. Oftentimes what happens is they're looking not only for prestige and title, but they're looking for bigger salaries. And we can't just simply afford that. So this is the unfortunate consequence of limited resources, is that, you know, there's a huge brain drain that takes place from local actors. We had a community member, this is a story I talk about a lot, so if you've heard me say this, I'm sorry, but this is we had a community participant in one of our education programs. She never held a pencil in her life. She'd never been to school. She came from a nomadic family. We included her in our education program. She excelled. She graduated from high school. And then eventually we hired her as a staff. This is someone who had no experience. As local actors, we take risks every day hiring people that would never make it into an interview for an INGO, let alone the UN. Forget about it. People who don't even know what a CV looks like. He'd never written a CV in their life. But we find that they are dynamic, there's a spark, there's potential, we take the risk and we develop them. That young lady, after being with Adeso for so many years, is now an HR staff member at UNDP in Somalia. But while I'm proud on the one hand for her, and I'm really, really happy, you know, she stuck it out with us for about 10 years. But I also know, and she was in tears when she was leaving us. She's like, look, I have so many family obligations. There's so many people depending on me. I need the money. I have to go. So we said, we understand. Please go. You know, we're happy. But this is the kind, you know, she was extremely loyal, and she didn't want to make that move. But she had to for financial reasons. So, but this is the unheard of narrative and story in the humanitarian system, how we are actually developing the capacity of the international system, whether it be UN agencies or whether it be INGOs. We are developing your capacity constantly because we take the risk and hire people and develop them and invest in them year after year and year that you guys would never even know about. Never been, some of your country directors started off as local NGO staff members. But we developed them, we took a risk on them, we hired them before they even knew what a CV was, and now they're with you guys. So we need to recognize that investment that we're making that's currently untold and unmonetized and unappreciated.
We can continue. I see that also you also have more questions, and we started a little bit late, so I also took the liberty to take a bit more time on stage. But I get some signals that we have to wrap up. Will not be correct to try to wrap it up and say like these are the key issues that we got out of it, because I think everyone got a lot out of it, and probably different things that you got out of it, and that's good. There's also the drawing to remind us of key notions that have been shared. Really curious to look at it afterwards. There will be tea and coffee. Again, I shared it with you. It's on the first floor and on the ground floor. So please also learn from each other, continue this conversation, try to find these very interesting people to ask more, and continue with this great humanitarian congress. Thank you very much for your engagement.